right, the suspense is over. India has decided how it will spend the money it has over the next 1 year. It's this government's last full budget before the general election. The expectations were endless, the resources weren't. How has the government balanced the two? Here's the verdict on Budget 2018.
ये बजट फार्मर फ्रेंडली, कॉमन मैन फ्रेंडली, बिजनेस एनवायरनमेंट फ्रेंडली और साथ ही साथ डेवलपमेंट फ्रेंडली भी है.
That's the message the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party wants to send with India Budget 2018. That the government is concerned about you, the voter. And what's the harm in that? After all, India needs jobs. India has to improve the lives of its farmers. And India has to ensure the standard of living improves. India, after all, is poised to be the world's 5th largest economy very soon.
Indian economy is now a $2.5 trillion economy, 7th largest in the world. India is expected to become the 5th largest economy very soon.
But that's a mighty challenge and needs a lot of money and wealth generation. So the finance minister loosened the purse strings and set aside more than 14 lakh crore rupees, or more than $220 billion for rural infrastructure and supporting farmers.
For creation of livelihood and infrastructure in rural areas, a total amount to be spent by ministries will be rupees 14.34 lakh crores from extra budgetary and non-budgetary resources of rupees 11.98 lakh crores.
That, Mr. Jaitley says, will also create jobs. Seems like a win-win situation. Also in the budget is the most ambitious health insurance scheme ever attempted. But there's a catch. The more the government spends, the more the fiscal deficit widens. And investors, foreign investors, don't like that.
बजट में प्रस्तुत की गई नई योजना आयुष्मान भारत, इस आयुष्मान भारत योजना समाज के इन सभी वर्गों को, जिसको हम कहें दलित, पीड़ित, शोषित, वंचित, महिला, गरीब, निम्न गरीब, मध्यम वर्ग, इन सबको बीमारी की जो आफत आ जाती है उससे मुक्ति दिलाने की, उससे चिंता से मुक्ति दिलाने का एक बहुत बड़ा कदम है.
The FDI in India last fiscal was some $60 billion. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has invited businessmen to come and make in India. And it is their assessment that will decide if the money continues to flow into India.
I would say that in the last 4 years, this is the 3rd time that the goals have been delayed.
WION had earlier reported that the BJP will seek a political message from the budget. The party managed to retain the Prime Minister's home state, Gujarat, in elections in December, but lost significant number of seats, 16 to be precise. And on budget day, the news from Rajasthan wasn't very encouraging either, where BJP lost 2 parliamentary and 1 assembly seat to Congress in by-elections.
Therefore, I do not propose to make any further changes in the structure of the income tax for individuals.
न्यू इंडिया की नींव को सशक्त करने वाला बजट है.
नहीं, बहुत ही शानदार बजट है. देश के विकास का बजट है.
गरीबों के कल्याण का ये बजट है,
जो गांव, गरीब, मजदूर और किसान के कल्याण के बारे में सोच रहा है.
No big explosive announcements that might have been expected before an election.
जो मैजिशियन आते और कहते गिली 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 देखो हम यहाँ से खरगोश निकाले हैं, वही बात.
It's an election jumla, you know.
The verdict is not out as yet, but the battle for 2019 has already begun. Bureau Report, WION.
So let's break down the major allocations that the Indian Finance Minister has made in this year's budget. There is no doubt that this budget brings some good news for the Indian farmer. The Finance Minister has promised to hike the minimum support price to 1.5 times of the cost of the crop. Now, what is minimum support price, better known as MSP? It is the assured price paid by the government to buy agricultural produce from farmers. This incentive is for farmers producing the Kharif crop. The Modi government also plans to hike the agriculture credit target, or in simpler terms, credit given only to farmers for the next fiscal by 10%. And this takes the total target to a whopping 11 lakh crore rupees. this is the kind of money this government plans to spend to support farmers in India. There's also an emphasis on ensuring that farmers have access to better irrigation facilities. The Indian government has set aside 5,000 crore rupees for a micro-irrigation funds. The second big focus area we can tell you, and likely most likely the top headline in tomorrow's newspapers, is the health sector. The government has made some major announcements here. The first of its kind universal healthcare scheme in India, and arguably the biggest such in the world. Under the scheme, India's most vulnerable families will get a health cover of 5 lakh rupees every year. The government of India will pump in 1,200 crore rupees to set up more than 1 lakh wellness centres to provide quality health care at cheaper rates around the country. Now, the third category that saw major announcements was the micro, small and medium business sector, more commonly known as the MSMEs, that's micro, small and medium enterprises. The finance minister has allocated 3 lakh crore rupees for lending to micro and small businesses. Some MSMEs have got relief from corporate tax. Remember, major industry bodies had urged the government to do so, and the government has listened to them. The businesses which have a turnover of up to 250 crore rupees will now have to pay only 25% corporate tax. Earlier, that figure was 30%, so that's a drop of about 5%. The roadmap for this rate cut was laid in 2015, in the 2015 budget, but the proposal was not implemented until now. 3,794 crore rupees have been set aside for the micro, small and medium enterprise sector. So we've given you the verdict, we've given you the takeaways, and I'm sure many of you were at work when the speech was made by the finance minister, and there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth. So we've crunched the almost 2-hour-long speech into a few minutes. Here's a look at who's got what in this budget.
My government is committed to the welfare of the farmers. For decades, the country's agricultural policy and programs has remained production-centric. We had sought to effect a paradigm shift. The Honorable Prime Minister gave a clarion call to double the farmers' income by 2022, when India celebrates its 75th year of independence. Our emphasis is on generating higher incomes for farmers. We consider agriculture as an enterprise and want to help the farmers to produce more from the same land parcel at lesser cost and simultaneously realize higher prices for their produce. We are now launching a flagship national health protection scheme to cover 10 crore poor and vulnerable families. This is approximately 50 crore beneficiaries. By providing them up to 5 lakh rupees per family per year for secondary and tertiary care hospitalization. This will be the world's largest government-funded healthcare program. सरकार उज्ज्वला योजना के तहत 8 करोड़ गरीब महिलाओं को मुफ्त गैस कनेक्शन देगी. There is a 3% cess on personal income tax and corporate income tax, consisting of 2% cess for primary education and 1% cess for secondary and higher education. In order to take up the needs of education and healthcare and BPL, I have announced in part A of my speech, to fund this, I propose to increase the cess by 1%. The existing 3% cess will be replaced by a 4% health and education cess to be levied on the tax payable. This would enable us to collect an additional rupees 11,000 crores. Fiscal deficit for 2013-14 was 4.4% of the GDP. The Prime Minister and the government have always attached an utmost importance to prudent fiscal management and controlling fiscal deficit. As honorable members would recall, we embarked upon the path of consistent fiscal reduction and consolidation in 2014. Fiscal deficit was brought down to 4.1 in 14-15, 3.9 in 15-16, 3.5 in 16-17. Revised fiscal deficit estimate for 2017-18 is at rupees 5.95 lakh crores, that is 3.5% of the GDP. I am projecting a fiscal deficit of 3.3% of the GDP for 2018 and 19. The present practice allows the recipients to fix their own emoluments, which invites criticism. I am therefore proposing necessary changes to refix the salary, constituency allowance, other expenses and meeting allowances payable to members of parliament with effect from 1st April 2018. The law will also provide for an automatic revision of emoluments every 5 years indexed to inflation. The law will also provide, I repeat, for an automatic revision of emoluments every 5 years indexed to inflation. I am sure the members of parliament will welcome this initiative and which will not suffer any criticism in future. The government does not consider cryptocurrencies as legal tender or coin and will take all measures to eliminate the use of these crypto assets in financing illegitimate activities or as part of the payment system. The government will explore use of blockchain technology proactively for ushering in a digital economy. महोदया, गरीब की एक चिंता रही है सिर के ऊपर अदद छत की। भ्रष्टाचार करके जुटाई गई बेईमानी संपत्ति से दूर गरीब को बस ईमानदारी की कमाई से एक छत, एक छोटा सा मकान चाहता है। गरीब अपने घर का सपना पूरा कर सके, इसके लिए हमारी सरकार उसकी पूरी मदद कर रही है। हमने लक्ष्य रखा है कि 2022 तक देश के हर गरीब के पास उसका अपना घर हो। इससे लिए ग्रामीण और शहरी इलाकों में प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना शुरू की गई है। प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना ग्रामीण के तहत 2017-18 में 51 लाख और वर्ष 2018-19 में 51 लाख यानी 1 करोड़ से ज्यादा सिर्फ ग्रामीण इलाकों में बनाए जा रहे हैं। शहरी क्षेत्रों में 37 लाख मकान बनाने के लिए मदद स्वीकृत की गई है। Many positive changes in the personal income tax rates applicable to the individuals in the last 3 years. Therefore, I do not propose to make any further changes in the structure of the income tax for individuals. There is a general perception in society that individual business persons are have better income as compared to salaries class. However, the income tax data suggests that a major portion of the personal income tax collection comes from the salaried class. A life with dignity is a right every individual in general, more so for a senior citizen. To care for those who cared for us is one of the highest honors. To further the objective of providing a dignified life, I propose to announce the following incentives for senior citizens. Exemption of interest income on deposits with banks and post offices to be increased from rupees 10,000 to rupees 50,000, and TDS shall not be required to be deducted on such income under section 194A. The benefit shall also be for interest on all fixed deposit schemes and recurring deposit schemes.
So with as many as 8 state elections due in India this year, followed by a general election, it would have been surprising if the Narendra Modi government had presented a budget not aimed at the bottom of the economic pyramid. In that sense, the government has stuck to the script. In fact, this budget was purely about politics. It was aimed at covering an overwhelming majority of India's population. The budget mantra is health, wealth and happiness. But the mix of health, wealth and happiness is uneven for the Indian population. The budget has looked at placating angry farmers, creating jobs for disenchanted youth and improving infrastructure for the middle class. All three are the government's biggest vote banks in election season. So let's break that down for you one by one. Firstly, mollifying the rural electorate was a major theme in this year's budget. In his budget speech, the Finance Minister of India, Mr. Arun Jaitley, said that the government will work to improve the price realization of farm products. The minimum support price or rate at which the government procures crops from farmers will be raised. Agriculture centres will be developed to aid farmers with direct sales of their products. An agri-market infrastructure fund will be set up with an initial corpus of $313 million. A new scheme called Operation Greens will be set up to promote agricultural products. The quantum of institutional credit for farmers has been hiked by 10% to $172 billion. But will all this be enough to allay the concerns of India's farmers about a drought? Remember, it was only 3 days back that the economic survey released by the government warned that climate change could adversely affect farm income by up to 20 to 25% in the medium term. The survey stressed on the need for, quote-unquote, dramatic improvement in irrigation, use of new technologies and better targeting of power and fertilizer subsidies. The second issue that is being focused on is unemployment. It has been identified as one of India's biggest problems. The government has been receiving a lot of flack for failing to deliver on its electoral promise of creating 10 million jobs every year. It's a huge target. In his budget speech this morning, the finance minister mentioned the word employment 17 times. He said measures have started showing results, and a recent study has shown that 70 lakh formal jobs will be created this year. Hoping to further boost job creation in the formal sector, Arun Jaitley announced that the government will contribute 12% of wages of new employees in the Employee Provident Fund or the EPF to incentivize employment of more women and to enable higher take-home wages. The budget has also proposed to amend the EPF Act. This is to reduce the contribution of women employees to 8% for the first 3 years of their employment, while the employer's contribution will remain at 12%. But the startup industry has been left out completely. The complete exclusion of angel tax in the policy announcements may have clipped the wings of early-stage startups, most of whom depend on capital from angel investors for the initial boost. For the middle class, the government has pitched ease of living with an infrastructure push. The government will provide water supply to all households in 500 cities under the Amrit program. Continuing its smart city project, the government has identified 99 smart cities, with an outlay of 2.04 lakh crore rupees. A further 5 lakh Wi-Fi spots will be created in rural areas under the BharatNet scheme. The government clearly trying to target a wide section of the society. This was the political messaging in this budget. What about the investors? A quick way to gauge it is the market. It was a day of ups and downs for the Indian stock market. The Sensex crashed by more than 500 points as the minister announced a 10% levy on capital gains of over 1 lakh rupees. Adding to the market sentiment, the government also set a fiscal deficit target at 3.3%, which was higher than the 3% indicated in the economic survey. Moreover, there were no anticipated reductions in corporate tax rates. It was brought down only for businesses with annual revenue of less than 2.5 billion rupees. And to top it all, the minister said that he was leaving the tax slabs unchanged, leaving less money in the hands of the middle class to spend. The markets recovered slightly towards the end of the day, but still closed lower. Now, who are the big winners and losers of this year's budget? The farmers, arguably among the biggest winners. A lot of focus on them. A lot of money has been allocated to improve their lot. The most notable being the increased MSP or minimum support price and a jump in allocation for development of irrigation and other facilities in rural areas. The farmers will also get a boost from selling excess solar energy. The government today has given the go-ahead to state governments to buy solar energy, and this will help farmers who use solar-powered pumps. Another set of winners is the healthcare providers. who could stand to gain from the mega universal healthcare scheme announced today. In fact, healthcare companies saw a spike in their stocks after the announcement, even though the rest of the market was bearish post the budget. There's some reason to cheer for the infrastructure companies as well. The finance minister has promised a record spending spree on infrastructure, and this could lead to more business for construction and engineering firms. These were the winners. Let's also talk about those who were not very impressed by today's budget. To most analysts and experts, is the biggest loser in this year's budget. The common man will have to contribute a little extra to the government's coffers now. There were no changes to the income tax slabs, like many of us had hoped for. The government has hiked education cess by 1%. Long-term investors will now have to pay a 10% tax on their gains. And that high-tech smartphone that you were eyeing is set to get expensive. Popular smartphone companies like Apple and Samsung got no goodies from Mr. Jaitley. The customs duty on mobile phones has been hiked to 20% now. Now, let's dwell a bit more on the announcement that's making waves. The Indian government says its healthcare insurance scheme is the largest in the world. The finance minister himself called it Namo Care, so its comparison with Obamacare is quite obvious. Obamacare was introduced to combat monopoly of private insurance companies in America, but the Indian government, through this healthcare scheme that it's introduced today, wants to ensure that the poor get access to quality healthcare. With his healthcare reform, the Obama administration wanted to expand the existing Medicaid program in America that covered low-income Americans. The Indian government has a more ambitious target. It wants to give healthcare cover to 37% of this country's population. The aim of Obamacare was to ensure 15% of the population that did not have health insurance of any form. But the Indian government, this Indian government scheme, if implemented well, will benefit 10 crore families in the country. Obamacare brought down the number of uninsured Americans to 23 million by ensuring health coverage in all healthcare institutions. The Indian government, for now, is only offering its healthcare scheme in secondary and tertiary healthcare institutions. Obamacare was a more broad reform for America. The law implemented policies that slowed the growing cost of healthcare in that country. On the other hand, the Indian government's health insurance scheme only covers healthcare costs of up to 5 lakh rupees. So there are a lot of differences, but it's caught the imagination of a lot of people. The world watched Finance Minister Arun Jaitley's speech today to know whether India is walking the path of fiscal prudence. And on that front, the news has been disappointing. At 3.3%, the government has set a slightly wider than expected budget deficit target for the next fiscal year. The widening fiscal deficit is something that will leave foreign investors edgy. The finance minister announced a hike in customs duty on mobile phones to 20% from the current 15%. It's a move that is more likely to force foreign players to pass on the burden to consumers, which basically means that your phone, the next one that you're planning to buy, will be more expensive. Chinese phone makers, understandably, are not a happy lot. The proposal to tax long-term capital gains may have spooked the stock market briefly this morning, but it is being seen as a welcome move for the long term because it will help correct the imbalance in market investments. WION Gravitas, and we're discussing the union budget that was presented today by Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. The armed forces may have been forgiven for expecting that only months after the Doklam standoff with China, they could see a bigger defense budget. That didn't happen. Nor, it seems, was Finance Minister Arun Jaitley inclined to be generous given the gravity of the situation on the line of control with Pakistan, where 860 ceasefire violations were recorded only last year. The first 21 days of this year also saw 124 ceasefire violations. So how much has Mr. Jaitley given to the forces? Last year's defense budget was 2,74,114 crore rupees, or about $3 billion. This year's defense budget is 2,95,511 crores, or $46 billion. Spending on equipment will be 99,563 crores. That's 15 billion roughly. And I'm talking about dollars. It's a modest 7% increase, making up 1.58. That's a little over 1.5% of the projected GDP for the current year. It's the lowest increase since the 1962 war, according to some estimates. Comparatively, the armed forces of countries in India's neighborhood are getting a better deal, even though their national borders are not under threat. There are no insurgencies backed by foreign powers, and their armed forces are mostly in peace stations. China, for instance, spent $151 billion on its military last year. Ironically, it was a 7% increase over 2016. Saudi Arabia spent $51 billion in 2017. Japan, which is smaller than India, spent $48 billion. Pakistan's defense budget last year was $8.78 billion, far less than India's. But since the army dominates the polity and economy, it is able to leverage that dominance to get whatever it wants. Its alliance with China brings other benefits not usually reflected in budget papers. Comparisons with the US do not really make sense because it is a superpower, but for general knowledge, it is over $600 billion. More relevant is how the US goes about planning for procurement, which has valuable lessons for India. The military's theatre commander makes a presentation to a congressional committee. The presentation covers current capabilities and what are the future capabilities planned for. Based on that, the congressional committee projects the financial requirements to Congress, but the actual procurement depends on how much money is available. In India, especially in the last few years, funds have been less, which has forced the armed forces to make do. Here's a list of what each of the three services have been asking for years now. What is the Indian Army's requirement? They need assault rifles, they need carbines, they need anti-tank rifles, artillery and armoured vehicles, attack helicopters and drones. Let's see what are the Indian Air Force's requirements. Faster production of Tejas light fighters, new single-engine fighters, transport aircraft, attack and transport helicopters, mid-air refuelers, more airborne warning and control systems. The Indian Navy wants 6 advanced diesel-electric stealth submarines, 1 more nuclear-powered attack submarine, maritime helicopters, 2 more aircraft carriers. All of this, understandably, costs a lot of money. Now, there's one prominent feature of Budget 2018, that's the incentive to get more women in India's formal economy and keep them there. That is in line with the Modi government's stated position to do more for women empowerment. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley has said that the government will amend the Employees Provident Fund Act or EPF Act to reduce the Provident Fund contribution of women employees to 8% from the existing 12% with no changes in employers' contributions. And this move is aimed at encouraging women to join the workforce, enabling a higher take-home pay. In fact, this comes on the back of the economic survey, which says female labour force participation rate has declined to 24% in the 2015-2016 fiscal from 36% in 2005-2006. Additionally, there are a number of benefits for women below the poverty line. The finance minister has also announced 8 crore free gas connections for them under the Ujjwala Yojana and 4 crore electricity connections under the Saubhagya Yojana. There's one more step to encourage women entrepreneurs. Loans to women's self-help groups will now increase. The budget for that has been hiked by as much as 37%. And we've been speaking to a cross-section of the society, business leaders, political leaders. We spoke to Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, chairperson of WION earlier today. This is what she had to say about the budget.
The 8% is definitely something that is expected to skew employment in favor of women. But it let's see how effectively rolled out that is also. Secondly, I think if there are 2 negatives that I'd like to talk about, one is about the 10% long-term capital gains tax that they have introduced, which I don't think is really going to serve the purpose, because you have a short-term 15% capital gains tax, and with the 5% differential, I'm worried that investors will take a very short-term view of the Indian capital markets. And you don't want that, especially at a time when we are trying to get more money in the market with which to drive some of the sectoral investments. So I really worry about that aspect of the differential, in terms of long-term capital gains. So what is the incentive for people to remain invested in the markets is my question. Secondly, I think although the MSME sector has benefited from the 25% corporate tax rate, I think there should have been something to incentivize larger corporates with a reduced corporate tax, because you can see globally there is a reduction in corporate taxation, And I think if we want to remain competitive and attract investments, it would have been good to have seen a reduction in corporate tax rates, even if it was just up to 30% levels.
And now listen in to what Sanjay Baru, the Secretary General of FICCI, had to say about this budget.
Overall, it's a budget strategy that will boost economic growth by stimulating demand, particularly rural demand, but also the spending on infrastructure, on housing, affordable housing, on railways. All of this is necessary to increase the level of demand, to increase capacity utilization in the industrial sector, and to sustain higher rates of growth. So overall, I think this is a positive approach. There may be some downside risks in terms of inflationary pressures, but I think, or for that matter, the fiscal deficit being a bit higher than was anticipated. But I think that is a price we had to pay in order to revive investment, in order to revive demand, and to revive economic growth.
And earlier today, we also spoke to Adi Godrej, the chairman of the Godrej Group, and this was his take on the union budget.
It's not a question of a budget offering to industry. A budget should create growth. I think some of the measures announced in the budget are good. For example, you talked of agriculture in the rural sector. I think that will be very helpful to consumer products businesses. Rural economy will do well if the proposals are well implemented. That will create good consumer demand. We think it will help our company called Godrej Agrovet, which is in the agri and veterinary fields, and that company should do well as a result of the measures announced in the budget. So some of the measures announced should have a good effect. But what was very disappointing, that something that was announced 3 years ago, that the corporate tax rate in India will be brought to 25%, has not been implemented. It's been implemented only for small and medium companies at best. And most of the companies that have to compete with global companies have not been affected, have not enjoyed the benefits of this thing, which was very necessary for India to be competitive. The US and UK have reduced their rates considerably this year. We have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. And we have not only the high corporate tax rate, but other taxes like dividend distribution tax, etc. So it's quite disappointing that what was promised by this finance minister some years ago has not been implemented.
So how do you look at the tax on the long-term capital gain? Because by the time the announcement was being made, the market had started to go in negative, sir.
Yes, it's a disappointing announcement. Because a few years ago we had the share transfer tax, which was in lieu of long-term capital gains tax. Now we have both. Although fortunately he has a grandfathering clause, so we won't have to pay tax on the past gains. But I think it's disappointing. You can't have the government do one thing at one point of time and then change it unilaterally.
The killing of a young social media star in Pakistan's Karachi has unleashed festering anger at a rash of alleged extrajudicial murders and the police accused of orchestrating them. Here's a report.
An aspiring model accused of being a Taliban insurgent. Naqibullah Masood was gunned down in Karachi in what local police say was an operation targeting extremists. To his fans, though, the 23-year-old was a Pakistani social media star known for his good looks and goofy videos. And his death has sparked anger over alleged staged killings by security forces.
We will protest the killing of innocent people wherever it takes place. Naqib was our son. He hasn't left us and is alive in the hearts of 200 million mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers. And it also proves that he was not a terrorist. I want other Naqibullahs to remain safe.
Karachi is one of Asia's most dangerous cities. However, there has been a fall in violent crime and militancy after a cleanup operation was launched 5 years ago. But killings masked as confrontations with authorities have surged.
Our police are not trained in forensics. The investigation procedures are archaic, whereas crimes are committed on scientifically advanced basis. So they are only left with one option: pick a guy, hang him, beat him, and if he survives, that is his fate. And if he dies, just dump him in the bushes.
A senior policeman has been accused of being the driving force behind Masood's death, and hundreds others. But many of these deadly encounters predate his rise to power, and the government is under pressure to act.
Sindh government has a concern on it. Sindh government is on to board all stakeholders, and the Sindh government is trying to make a law on it.
Masood's death has struck an angry chord with thousands of protesters. They want justice for the young rising star, who they believe has paid the ultimate price: to put the spotlight on police killings.